You're listening to Jay's Analysis, integrating film, philosophy, geopolitics, literature, history, economics, intrigue, and espionage, only at jaysanalysis.com. And now, Jay's Analysis Podcast, with your host, Jay Dyer. Welcome back to Jay's Analysis, and I want to do something a little different. I wanted to kind of do a more free-flowing discussion, philosophical musings, not the standard style of planned out speech and mono prose on my part. So, yeah, this is good. This is going to be fun. I want to say, first of all, that Jay's Analysis has had a tremendous amount of growth. I don't usually talk about the site and what's going on, but I think it deserves to be commended, and that goes out to all of you guys out there that listen. I want to thank everybody who listens. It's been a tremendous response, especially 2015. Jay's Analysis had 1.15 million views in 2015, which was about 5 times more than I had in 2014. So a tremendous year. A big thanks goes out to Patrick Henningsen for 21st Century Wire and writing for 21 Wire and all the different big alt media sites that have promoted Jay's Analysis. Whatever views or particular niches, peculiarities they have, I at least appreciate the reblogs and postings of my articles. And, things didn't work out with Talk Network. That's fine. I was having enough success on my own that I didn't need Talk Network anyway. So everything is looking good here as it is. So the audios that have been posted on YouTube are getting a lot more views as time goes by. The Jay's Analysis and Esoteric Hollywood podcasts are doing great. Some of those episodes have 10, 20, and 30,000 listens, which is pretty great as podcasts go. So I'm glad for all of that. The book, I'm glad to announce, is finally complete. For the most part on my end. I sent the manuscript a couple days ago to the publisher. So look for Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film from Trine Day Publishers in June. Excited about that. Feels good to have that complete. I only wish that I had more space, so I had to pick and choose. It was difficult to pick what essays and pieces would go into Esoteric Hollywood. A lot of stuff had to be rewritten, completely rewritten, and that took a lot of time. So, but I think it's going to be good. I'm excited for that, and I've got several speaking engagements coming up. I've been doing some more of that lately. I spoke in Chattanooga. That was a lot of fun on predictive programming. A lot of good feedback on that. Some critics, as usual. I don't care. Critics don't bother me. I think it's funny. It's fun, especially the over-the-top foaming at the mouth haters. Those are a lot of fun because it doesn't really make any sense why you hate something so much, but it's fun. I like that. Bring it. And so people were kind of critical, saying you were loose in your conversation. Well, I'll tell you why I was loose in that conversation, that video, is because I wasn't exactly sure what the topics were going to be. I knew we had a general outline, and I sent the producer of that event some topics, and he just kind of picked what he wanted to talk about. So I didn't really have an idea. So anybody who is used to doing this, you know that you're going to ramble when you don't know what the topics are, and you're expected to talk for 2-3 hours at a time. And that event in full ended up being around 2 hours of talking. So once you get out there and do this stuff, it's a lot different than sitting behind your keyboard and complaining about it. But regardless, I have a blast doing it. It's a lot of fun to go and meet people in person and talk. And I'll be speaking in Nashville at an event soon that will be posted. I think I'm going to be going to Canada to speak in regard to my book when it comes out in a few months. And I'm sure there will be more speaking engagements lined up in the next year, especially with the release of the book. So big thank you to all of the Jay's Analysis readers and promoters and posters and collaborating websites, Soul the East, 21st Century Wire, Alternate Current Radio, Hoaxbusters. All you guys are great, and I apologize if I'm forgetting somebody. And I want to thank especially the Jay's Analysis subscribers. They're all of you guys that have been so gracious and magnanimous towards the Jay's Analysis podcast to support it by purchasing my lectures and talks. So this has been quite an adventure. This is, I guess, 8-10 years of blogging in the hat. And it's finally turning into something really good. And I'm looking forward to where we're going to take things. There's going to be a lot more philosophy down the road. We're going to do more Plato. We're going to do more classics. We're going to do Aristotle. I've had a lot of requests to do the Bible. So we're going to do some in-depth Bible talks. I think that'll be beneficial, especially given mass ignorance of the Bible. We're going to do more classics, Dostoevsky. These are at least my plans for the future. So for those of you out there who are busy, you've got a hellacious job, but you like to listen to podcasts. I got a lot of people telling me that they like to listen to my stuff, at work, which is great because I'm going to try to give you classical education via these podcasts. And not just that, I want to eventually expand into I want to do a complete talk series on tragedy and hope. I want to go through all of that book. I want to go through a lot of esoteric stuff. Today we're going to talk some about Hoffman's Secret Societies book. I want to get into traditionalism, perennialism, Wilking Smith books. I want to talk about Bertrand Russell books. I want to do a lot of stuff. So all of you guys out there that have contributed and made this possible, that's all for you, and thanks to you guys. And as I said, 1 million views last year is pretty tremendous. I'm really thankful for that. Now, several of my articles were, of course, syndicated on larger sites that had a couple articles last year that had themselves, 500,000, 1 million views, which was pretty amazing. The matrix analysis and my article on aerosol geoengineering, those together, had over 1 million views, 1 to 2. So that's pretty wild. Thank you out there for that. Thank you also to Jennifer Sodini of Evolve and Ascend for promoting my work and getting that out there to so many people. A lot of these sites I don't even necessarily agree with, but, more the merrier. They want to promote my work, go for it. I do think, though, that now some of the analyses, especially ones that I put in the book, I'll probably take those down or, leave maybe a fourth or a third of the article up and then, direct people who like those analyses to purchasing of the book, because it's not really fair to the publisher to have the entire book up online, right? So at least I'm going to avoid that as much as I can. But again, it's just a blast to do this. I didn't think I would be doing this a year ago, 2 years ago. I quit a year and a half ago. I guess I quit the wage slave job I was at because I thought I could probably put my time and effort into doing my own thing and do better than a wage slave job. And we are pretty much there, thanks to you guys. So this is exciting. I think that what I want to try to do is offer a more grounded alternative approach to the issues that we face in our day. I find much of the alternative media circus to be ridiculous, nonsensical, and a waste of time. And, even though I'm kind of a clown and a goofy guy joking around, I still want to offer something quality. And I think I do have something quality to offer in pointing people in the right direction as a hub of research and analysis, as well as being ridiculous and doing impersonations and improv comedy and having fun while we do it, right? Life is meant to be enjoyed. It's not meant to be miserable. And it's not meant to be lived in fear and paranoia and all the nonsense that you get in 80 to 85% of the so-called alternative media. I don't even want to be classed in alternative media. That's just I don't like any of it really. So, count me out of all that. I do my own independent analysis and research, and I don't want to be a part of anybody's Tea Party, patriotard crowd. That's your thing. I'm not into that. I think that stuff's ridiculous and stupid, and we're going to see today why some of that is so. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be unhappy with the religious philosophical approach that I take, and that's fine. I'm quite used to that. It's fun when you, like I said, when you get to the point where you're gaining a little bit of an audience, along come the haters, and that's some of the funnest stuff is when you get these videos made about you. That one guy calls me a draconian. So I'm from the constellation of Draco, and I secretly work for the aliens. That's fun. You've arrived when you're a draconian. I'm also an anti-Semitic Nazi, but at the same time, I'm also Dyer from Jews Analysis. So I don't know how I'm both of those at the same time, but it's fun nonetheless to be all of these things. I'm also, my favorite one is that I'm the grandson of Ted Turner. Yeah. So yeah. And I'm also the J. Dyer on IMDb that produced black sitcoms in the early 2000s. So yeah, when I was a freshman in college, I was simultaneously producing black sitcoms, and I'm a Hollywood shill. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think that's me? Or do you think it would probably take you about 5 minutes of Googling to figure out that's not me? But fun nevertheless. Maybe I could capitalize on having the same name as a guy that produced black sitcoms. And I think the other J. Dyer now produces a Latino show for Netflix. Yeah, probably not me. Probably not me, if you just thought about it for a minute. But we're going to have a good talk today. We're going to get a little more serious, but I did just want to thank everybody and talk about the tremendous growth and progress that we've had so far, and shout outs, props to my peeps and all those who've been supporters and have been posting my stuff, sharing it. Please keep doing that. That's always helpful, because it's not, a lot of people think that you make a lot of money when you quit your day job and you do this full time. That's not really true. It's not. It's very much a struggle to get to the point of self-sufficiency. So, that's really what I'm shooting for, and I'm not far from that. So this is a situation where I quit the day job to live on savings for a while, to devote a couple years to doing what I do full time. So that's how I'm doing what I do. If you're out there and you're curious, it's not government funding, right? The CIA is not funding Jay's analysis. It would be a lot more snazzy if it was. So let's talk about some thoughts I've had the last few days, and then we're going to segue from that into discussions regarding popular ideas, popular thoughts and philosophies that are out there kind of bouncing around in the ether internet sphere, and a little bit of cultural analysis. And we're going to talk about some of the darker aspects of this kind of stuff with Hoffman's books. And then I want to dissect some of what I see as ridiculousness in alternative media. And I want to talk mainly about, as kind of an exemplary figure, Stefan Molyneux. Right. So I've gotten a lot of emails. People say, "Will why don't you get on this guy's show?" I probably had 10 people request me to go on Stefan Molyneux's show, which I actually tried one day a couple of years ago to go on his show, because they wanted to see a good debate between he and I concerning theism. Now, I don't doubt that'll ever happen. So the next best thing is I'm going to play a few clips, and I've listened to a good bit of Stefan over the years. I enjoy the show at times. It's fun to listen to. But then it just sort of falls into these same tropes and regurgitations of spanking and atheism and Darwinism. And that, it just gets old. How many times can you talk about that and promote this preposterous worldview? So I'm going to play some Stefan clips and dissect it much in the same fashion as I did William Lane Craig talk that you can find on my YouTube channel from, I guess, about a year ago, where I did this. I played some clips and then responded and dissected it. Try to give a good solid philosophical analysis to refute, what I see as a very erroneous and destructive position. And I've tried to understand why people adopt these kinds of philosophies like Darwinism and so forth. And then we're going to try to answer some questions, maybe the more common objections that people have to the notion of religious philosophy and the idea of God and so forth. And hopefully try to do an apologetic, right? Do a defense of why I believe what I believe. And hopefully in the process convince you to be of the same mind. Not through force and willpower, but through the use of reason and logic. And it's precisely reason and logic where I will find my sticking point and point of departure with the claims of Stefan Molyneux. So that's what you're in for. That's what you're going to hear tonight. And you might think, what does Michael Hoffman have to do with talking about reason, scientism, and Stefan Molyneux? Well, you'll see. I'm going to show you how that is. And as always, the first half of this podcast lecture talk analysis is free to the public, and the second half is for paid subscribers. So let's dive into this. Let's talk about ideologies, first of all, and worldviews, and how ideologies and worldviews work, and why this is important to think about. So if we were to start by thinking about ideologies and how they work and where they come from and how we're indoctrinated and so forth, I would agree, of course, with a lot of what you see out there in kind of the basic alternative media analysis, that we are programmed in a sense by what's around us. I also think, though, that we are largely products of our genetics too. So I tend to agree with the thesis of 60-40, that 60% of who we are is genetics, DNA, and the 40% would be the environment, epigenetics, etc. That's just my personal view from my research. Now, I always think back in these kinds of questions to kind of the college period, and that's where you're really idealistic and you think you're going to figure everything out, and you get these slogans that are battered about in classrooms and at different campus activities or whatever, and maybe you get involved in the campus, charity drive, or you're involved in campus ministry, or pick your flavor, right? Campus feminist group, and everybody has the impression, most of the time, age 18 to 22-ish, you have the impression that this is all organic. This is people starting these things up, all good-hearted, do-gooder, bleeding heart types, or truth crusaders and so forth, your conservative campus group, your libertarian campus group, your liberty defender campus group, whatever. Now you're right. So you think these are these independent institutions that are kind of just springing up and being created, and everyone is sincerely involved in what the group professes itself to be. And the reality is, of course, as you get older, you learn that unfortunately it's just not the case. Now, does that mean that those groups weren't in some sense organically created, or that they didn't harvest or use the energies of the persons who join them? Of course not. There's plenty of student groups that get created. But the point is that the ideologies that you get, generally speaking, from any sort of establishment institution in our day, for the most part, not everywhere, especially at the state schools, because those are much more tightly controlled than a lot of the the private institutions, at least in the U.S. Private institutions still have the option to opt out of the 501c3 government tax-free stuff and all that, so they can still kind of teach what they want. But the 501c3 thing, of course, was always a trap to take over the ability for individual private institutions to have whatever curricula they want, right? Now, that's a lot of in-depth educational history and philosophy that you can get into, and I would recommend Rushdoony's book, Messianic Character of American Education, for anybody who wants to delve deeper into that topic. Really good book. Obviously, I no longer accept any of Rushdoony's Calvinism, but there's still a lot of good stuff in Rushdoony that you can glean from and learn from. And I would also reject Rushdoony's Americanism, this idea of America somehow being a Christian place. I don't really buy into that anymore, and I haven't since about 2003 or 4 is when I dropped that ideology and read a lot of radical right-wing publications back in my early 20s and 2000s. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. So these ideologies, you get exposed to these, and so somebody like Stefan Molyneux, who's propounding the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, minimalist ethos, this is nothing new. This is an ideology that's been around for a while. Plenty of people out there in so-called alternative media who hawk this view. And I think it's interesting to look at the history, first of all, of libertarian thought, libertarian party. And I've said this many, many times. All we have to do is go back to the French Revolution. This is where, and then prior to that, the neoclassical economic theory of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Wealth of Nations, and so forth. And then you have the merchant noble revolution of France, which was split between two groups, the Jacobins and the Girondins. Girondins being the revolutionary right wing, the fake right-left dialectic that we have in our day ultimately descends from the French Revolution. The left wing being the Jacobin Illuminist communists. And that's not my conspiracy theorizing. I had an in-depth graduate level class on that topic, and all of these subjects came up in my French Revolution class. So I was at a mainstream university, and we openly were talking about the Girondins and the communists and the Illuminists in my class. So it's not a conspiracy theory. This is known public history, even from the mainstream. It's not debated. But so you got this kind of split between the Jacobins and the Girondins, as we said. And the Girondins are kind of the Jeffersonian type, or maybe the Ben Franklin, John Quincy Adams type view, George Washington type view. They want a private property, right? You look at Bacon's New Atlantis, what he projects the New World to be like America, and he still regards this necessity for private property. And a lot of this is influenced. There's a mixture of influences here, okay? You've got the Enlightenment, scientific rationalism that goes into this. You've got Protestantism that goes into this in its different flavors, be it Lutheran, Calvinist, Anabaptist. You've got Hermetic influences on the part of
Rosicrucians, of other alchemists, Western alchemists, the popularity of Rosicrucian and alchemical thought, the time of the Elizabethan Renaissance. So all of this is the background, the zeitgeist behind the revolutionary periods following the Enlightenment. And all of that goes into informing the milieu, the worldview, perspective that was dominant in that era. And so America arises out of this period. And you're going to see why I'm talking about America here in a moment, because America is the preeminent foundational nation that is believed to be grounded in reason. Okay? America is the great Enlightenment experiment of a nation supposedly created purely by propositional, rational thinking and organization. Where does that come from? Well, that is also has a long stream of influences from Machiavelli to John Locke, all the way back to Greek thinkers, Plato, the preeminence of reason, Aristotle, the Roman legal philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, etc., Cicero. So there's a breadth of things that go into this. Of course, the common law, English common law, the Catholic canon law, I think you could argue even has a place in that. Jesuit influence in terms of the formation of canon law over time. While that certainly was not on the mind of the founding fathers, so-called, of America, the legal tradition in the West, I'm saying, was indelibly marked by the influence of Catholic canon law. And this comes out of course, the Christian tradition, the medieval synthesis, the idea of combining the best seen elements of Greek philosophical thought with the Christian theological ethos to produce the medieval synthesis and so forth. Anyway, and so this tradition of reason, rationalism, enlightenment, as I said, has its forebears in the Renaissance humanism. You can find Pico della Mirandola citing even Greek church fathers at times, as well as Greek philosophers. And it's about the enthronement, ultimately, of reason. So when you hear Stefan Molyneux ranting in these YouTube videos, you have to understand that he's situated within a tradition that has a long descent, whether he recognizes it or not, or his myriad YouTube followers. And this long tradition, as we said, has a kind of a blender mix of influences, as many philosophies do. But the main point is that it arises out of a specific historic milieu that you can't divorce the thought from. Okay, that's crucial. So you can't divorce anarcho-capitalism or whatever, libertarianism, from the historical movement and progression out of which it came. And it's not ultimately a philosophy that grants freedom. It's a philosophy that has existed for several hundred years now. The various nations and ultimately you could argue the globe, because we're kind of in a globo-capital scheme, the whole world has been affected by this philosophy. And is it a good thing? Well, in a certain sense, I don't think you can castigate oversimplify and naively say that an entire philosophical or historical movement is always all bad. But the problem is that with most philosophies, unfortunately, they're generally a mix of good and bad. So a lot of people will ask me, quite frequently, well, what do you think about Hegel? What do you think about Dostoevsky? What do you think about Kierkegaard? What do you think about whoever? And, there's not simple answers to those kinds of questions. Obviously, I would probably like Dostoevsky the most out of that list there, but most philosophers are a mix of good and bad. And that's unfortunately not a simple answer that I think a lot of people want simple answers to. Oh, point me to the one guy who's, going to solve all the questions. And it just doesn't work that way. But so what you have is a mix of good and bad in philosophers, and many who are far worse than others. So when it comes to the question of the idea of liberty as a philosophy, everybody, I think, universally would locate this in the Greek tradition with so-called democracy in Greece. Now, this is ironic because the Greek philosophers, who are the most standout, best ones, like Plato or even Aristotle, considered democracy completely deformed and retarded and leading to tyranny. So why anyone would want to... In other words, really what we see is that democracy has just always kind of been a scam, is the point. And even Plato says that, democracy is really just a bunch of oligarchs behind the scenes running things. Now, why is that? Well, because not everybody's fitted to do every aspect of civil service or to operate in every capacity. They just don't have the skills and ability. Some of us are good at some things and some of us are not. Some of us are good at other things. And so it's not sensible to think that every single person in the society is leveled onto an equal footing with the same input, same wisdom, same insight, and same faculties and ability as everyone else. Most obviously, the fact that children are citizens but are not capable of running things. You can't put a child in control of a business. It doesn't work. Other persons are just not capable of doing that. Grandma is not going to be fitted to manage a troop, a company of soldiers. So, quite obviously, this radical notion of egalitarianism is not true. So what you have in the Enlightenment period is this resurgence of this idea of so-called democracy that, again, has these sort of precedents in something like the Italian republics, where we want to get away from this monarchy and these corrupt Borgia households and Medici's, and the Medici's say, well, we want a republic. But of course, the irony is that simply instituting some new form of government or some new thing, right, doesn't actually change the fact that you're ruled by rulers. You just swap out one batch of rulers for another batch. And that's what's the great irony here, is that democracy is, ironically, probably the most deceptive and ridiculous form of shadow government that there is. And that goes all the way back to Plato, pointing that out. Now, had these internet philosophers like Stefan Molyneux spent much time in actual philosophy, as I understand, Stefan was some sort of entrepreneur and then popped up on the internet as a philosopher, then he might have a better sense of historicity in regard to what he's talking about. I don't know that he really knows much about this or even cares, because really the show just kind of tends to be a mouthpiece for promoting his ideas, which almost always end up being Darwinism, don't spank, and libertarian entrepreneurship. So the height of philosophy is Darwinism and being an online entrepreneur. Well, I'm sorry, but life is much more rich. There's much more out there. Philosophy has much more depth, and there's much more to experience, okay, than this very shallow, materialistic perspective. And this is really my problem with most of these YouTube online philosophers who are good at demagoguery and sort of motivating a large crowd of people because they're salesmen, and it's not an accident that they were entrepreneurs and then suddenly pop up as economic philosophers. Now, so we have this tradition, which is an anti-tradition, a counter-tradition, is the best way to describe it, coming out of the West, coming out of the Enlightenment, that I think can best be described, as Spengler called it, a Faustian bargain. Faustian man. And what Faustian man wants to do is, in his Promethean desire for what he thinks freedom is, the dropping away of any limitations, right? The excision of any limiting ontological, ethical, metaphysical, or aesthetic boundaries. That's what constitutes freedom. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. So this idea is very easily packaged and sold as, you know, something that kind of makes sense because, well, doesn't everybody want to be free? You don't want to be under a tyrant. Yeah, so liberty, man. Right? I mean, it sounds good. It sounds like who wants to be a slave? Everybody wants to be free. So it's very easy to sell that kind of a presentation. And the irony, of course, is, as I'll point out here in a minute, is that these are the same people who are always castigating religion as a bunch of hucksters selling you and marketing you some mumbo jumbo, when that is exactly what the libertarian hucksters are out there doing. Right? They're out there selling you the mumbo jumbo of unlimited, uninhibited atomistic freedom. Do what thou wilt. Right? Now, many, many, many ways to critique this, but I think what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about Stefan, and then I'm going to give commentary, and I'm going to break in when I think it's relevant. So we're going to let Molyneux, in his own words, describe what he takes to be the importance of reason, evidence, and empiricism, and how this is all intimately tied up with naturalism, Darwinism, and the other grab bag of Darwinian Enlightenment monstrosities that Stefan Molyneux thinks is so revolutionary, even though it's 400 years old now. So we're still being repackaged and regurgitated and sold these 400-year-old lies, right, as if this is some great philosophic revolution. So I think Molyneux counts on you being ignorant of history and not knowing that people were saying this 400 or 500 years ago, and it doesn't work. Okay, so look at the world. The world has pretty much adopted the so-called democratic republican model of Western globo-capitalism. That's what dominates the world presently. And are we living in a great world? Does anybody think that the 20th century with its great wars is a better place than if we had taken some other philosophic course, right? So we're always told how evil the Middle Ages are and all this stuff, and how enslaved everyone is. And I would argue that, you in many ways, you probably had it better in the Middle Ages. You weren't subjected to aerosol chemtrail spraying. You weren't subjected to GMO foods. You weren't subjected to public education that was mandated to tell you that you're bad for being a boy. You weren't told that you're supposed to cut off your balls and penis and be a girl. I mean, it's just staggering to me that the end result of all this philosophy, which is what we're actually seeing in the death of the West, is the very philosophy that Molyneux has. So Molyneux's very philosophy is the reason of the death of Western culture. Ironically, in the midst of Molyneux making all these videos talking about the death of Western culture. So let's see how the empiricist, materialist philosophy of the anarcho-capitalist Girondin thinkers of the West lead to the very destruction that Molyneux claims to be concerned with opposing. Now, normally I wouldn't waste time on Stefan Molyneux or another character I would like to briefly respond to, Kurt Doolittle, some sort of internet libertarian, anarcho, Nietzschean, propertarian, whatever that is. But there are a crew of these people who I have had sort of run-ins with, Kurt Doolittle being one, as well as there's another guy, I'm trying to remember his name, who went off on me last year. I can't remember his name, but he apparently thought I was fake, that I was an internet bot, wasn't real. And this is another known libertarian person. What's his name? I can't think of it, but he's another one of these weird named persons like Stefan Molyneux, if that's even a real name. But now, why are we dealing with these people? Well, because they're all part of this crew, this clique, who are atomistic, materialistic empiricists, and they are quite dogmatic about their materialism, and they don't think that anyone is competent to respond to them or to reply to what they see as their infinite wisdom and cleverness. And I don't think they're that good at all. I think they're kind of ridiculous. And so the reason that I haven't really talked about these people is just because it's almost so bad and laughable that it doesn't deserve a response, but because of numerous requests and Kurt Doolittle calling me out publicly, I'll respond. So we can class Kurt in Stefan's camp, roughly. And these are the people who are of the opinion that scientism, reason, anarcho-libertarian, blah, 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 that is just the penultimate, that's everything. That's the highest point of any possible, there's nowhere else to go, man. That's just the end of the road for philosophy, and it's the pinnacle and peak of wisdom. And I think all this stuff is ridiculous, and we're going to see how many contradictions, presuppositional flaws, and just utter nonsense is involved in this entire perspective, and how what they do is just hawk to you the very philosophy of the establishment. The establishment's philosophy is hawked and peddled to you by all of these atheist, libertarian, anarcho, blah, blah, blahs. The hot pocket gamer demagogues. Right? So these are the people who are ruling over a kingdom of hot pocket gamer fedora wearers. So let's clear the Cheeto cheese from our neck beards and lick our fingers, and let's hear Stefan tell us what philosophy is. Okay.
Hi everybody, this is Stefan from Free Domain Radio. Hope you're doing well. So as you may know, I'm a philosopher, which means I'm in the business of delivering reason to people, which sometimes feels like it should require Amazon drones, 4 security guards, some duct tape, and perhaps even some lubricant. So it's quite important for me to understand my clients or your relationship with the product that I'm offering.
Let's stop there. Stefan is selling you a product. He's marketing you a product, right? Delivering you the product of reason in the free market of ideas, as he'll go on to say. Now, isn't this interesting? Because this whole position purports to be an anti-tradition position. But Stefan went to presumably some school, be it the School of Life or the School of Internet Marketing and Entrepreneurship, or whatever school he attended, and then read his list of books, Ayn Rand and so forth, and determined, he came to the realization that the body of tradition that was passed on to him through whatever means is the true tradition. And here Stefan is going to bequeath to you, dear neophyte, initiate, the body of tradition of reason that Stefan, as the Hierophant, has discovered. So already you can see, even though admittedly this is a pop video for a pop audience, that he's admitting to you that he's passing on a tradition to you. Now, that is unavoidable, okay? There's no such thing as a completely anti-traditional philosophy. All anti-traditional philosophies carry within themselves their own tradition, even if the tradition is to be anti-traditional. It's much like the presuppositional flaw of, for example, Jean-Paul Sartre in one of his works talks about the need to reject all authority. And this is what we hear bantered in these circles all the time, right? These libertarian Stefan type circles, right? Reject the authority and the fallacy of authority, and use your reason and logic to determine for yourself what is correct. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? Right? And Solomon says that an argument often sounds good until someone comes along and deconstructs it. So here I am to be the thorn in the side of this stupid argument because it doesn't work. Now, why do I say that? Well, when Jean-Paul Sartre says, you must reject all authority to be free, if you adhere to that proposition and thus act on that proposition, why, you've just accepted a new authority. You've accepted the argumentation from Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, you may think that it is objectively correct, right? But regardless, that truth, or so you think is the truth, has been delivered to you from some historic body of persons, namely the existentialist tradition, to which you then adhere. Now, anyone who studies logic, as Stefan is always touting, has read Aristotle, although I'm not sure that Stefan has actually read Aristotle, though he talks about logic a lot. Now, but if you study philosophy, and you're trained as a philosopher, then you've read Aristotle. Aristotle is part of a tradition, okay? Now, I'm not saying that because you believe in the objective authenticity of logic and that logic functions and operates in the world, that it's just based on human authority. No. I'm saying both can be true. You can have something true that comes to you from an authority, and they are authorities because it's true and because it is ordained as such. Now, that's a whole other different topic where we'll get into here in a little bit with the notion of a body of tradition that's passed on. And again, tradition itself does not guarantee or necessitate just this bare idea of tradition, right? Something being true, right? I was raised Baptist. I no longer believe that the Baptist faith is true, right? Many people are raised in a cult. That being raised in something, quite obviously, on its very face, doesn't make a thing true, but it also doesn't make it false, right? So it's really has no relevance. It's inconsequential to truthhood or falsity, right? Being raised in something, but it does show us that merely being in some group does not make the tradition true. However, it also does not make a tradition false, nor is it possible to be completely atomic, atomistic, ahistorical, and anti-traditional. It's utterly impossible. Because, for one, we all come from some parents, some nuclear unit of human copulation that produces offspring. Now, you inherit from that offspring traits, tastes, idiosyncrasies, abilities, etc., as well as a history and some teaching, presumably, hopefully, from your parents. Be it wrong or right, it's unavoidable, and that's what happens. Well, unless you're an orphan or something. That's not what I'm not talking about orphans. Right? So this is, of course, how human societies and cultures function. And so what we're going to see as we progress through Stefan here is that the attempt to be completely a-traditional and atomistic, individualistic anarchist, coupled with the, quote, death of Western civilization, is going to be made utterly nonsensical philosophically. So let's let Stefan explain more of what it is to be a reasonable, rational philosopher.
So I put together this chat to warn those of you who participate in the free market of ideas about the deep darkness that lies hidden within the human mind. Take a mental note of the word lie and its dual meaning. It becomes important later on. Now, before we examine the data about how people respond to reason, it's important to map out the socio-biological and historical context of this discussion. Stay awake! It will be important and interesting, I promise you. Now, all living organisms depend upon their accurate perception of reality in order to survive and reproduce. If a gazelle fails to identify a predator, it gets eaten. For a lion, a tiny mistimed lunge may be the difference between a full belly and death through starvation, or even broken bones from a zebra's kick. Now, human beings lack the sharp nails and teeth of lions or the speed of gazelles, yet we possess, of course, the most powerful and dangerous tool within the animal kingdom, our minds. We would therefore expect the human brain to be highly capable of accurately analyzing and conceptualizing the world around us. The process of reasoning invariably involves the use of logic, and logic itself is derived from the immutable properties of the physical world. Empiricism is another component of reason that depends upon the accurate perception of reality through sense data.
Wow. Well, there we go. Right away we have huge issues that are naively passed over as obvious and simple, clear-cut, no question about it, philosophical, settled issues. But now let's stop for a minute here, Stefan. Let's ask some questions here. You're here to deliver us reason. What is reason? What is reason? Okay. Now you proceed to describe the process by which some people claim reason is determined through matching up to immutable naturalistic processes. That is a process by which some people determine what they think reason is. That is not what reason is. So you haven't told us what reason is. Reason, at least philosophically, classically, is connected with the idea of logos or logoi. Now, I can give you at least some argument as to what reason is. And that is because I firmly believe in a world beyond merely material sense data. Now, Stefan does not, admittedly. And so this very tool that he holds to be a kind of new God, this impersonal magical force of reason that's out there in the world that matches up to materialistic necessary process, deterministic process, for him takes the role of the divine. For me, in our philosophy, our theology, reason is a tool that God gives. And it's a tool that functions because it taps into an immaterial and spiritual reality that undergirds the material so-called world. And the material world is really just the world of energy as it is so formed to our senses, right? So we sense solidity and so forth. We sense colors, sense tactile sensation and so forth. But we do not think that that is the totality of what is. Now, in response, you'll generally get from these persons that there's absolutely no way to know that there's anything beyond sense data. And how do we combat this? It's very simple to refute this proposition. Okay, so in philosophy, if we want to be consistent, right? Stefan is very interested in being rational and consistent and logical. Then presumably we don't want to have foundational contradictions in our worldview. We don't want to, from the outset, contradict ourselves and look ridiculous and be reduced by a reductio argument. But that is precisely what I'm going to do. I'm going to reduce his argument through reductio ad absurdum, which is a fallacy, obviously, to nonsense. Now, how do we do that? Well, the first thing he said is that logic is the conceptual human realm, right, which is material, matching up to immutable naturalistic process. This is what we call the determinist fallacy or the naturalist fallacy. What does that mean? Well, in this sense, it means that the ability to reason, by Stefan's own admission, is also a deterministic, materialistic process. So the illusion that you have of free thought, free will, self-consciousness, self-determination, and volition in counting through the objects of your experience and choosing this over that and parceling out, sussing out this from that, the true from the false, etc. That is illusory. Why? Because your mind is also part of the big machine. You're just another cog in a deterministic, immutable process that is material flux. So everything that Stefan just said has been canceled out and refuted as preposterous and retarded and absurd based on that. And it really is that simple. Why? Because they have no basis for consciousness, no basis for volition, freedom, and the ability to choose things, because they believe in fucking materialism. It's that simple. And I get heated over this because this is what everybody believes. And they believe it because they're sold it by marketers and PR guys like this chap. Right? Now, another problem beyond the determinist fallacy. Another problem would be, on what basis does he think that reason and logic are materialistic processes in the external world? Well, that doesn't make any sense. The world out there, in his view, is just matter, atoms bouncing around. Okay. How does that match up to immutable, unchangeable, conceptual laws of geometry and mathematics? Those two worlds don't mesh. Now, why do I say that? Well, because the world out there is all flux and change. It's just constant evolutionary change. Nothing out there sticks. Nothing out there corresponds to immutability, invariance, and conceptual reality. Now, this is a problem for all the people who take that materialistic perspective. They have no way to bridge the gap between that external world out there of material flux and the internal world of conceptual process and thinking, right? Because as we saw, the process of thinking is already encapsulated and collapsed into the big machine of materialistic chaotic process. Okay, so these two worlds don't mix. Then on top of that, the question of when I ask him what reason is, right, we're supposed to think that it's just observing the world in process and pattern. Well, I'm sorry, but you don't get process and pattern, which presupposes an order, right? In other words, the ability of the mind to pick out order in the midst of constant chaos. That makes no sense. Okay, so the patterns that you think you've noticed on which you build your conceptual laws, those patterns are illusory because your consciousness is illusory. I mean, come on. I mean, when are we going to get past retarded philosophy? And when are we going to get past listening to just guys that hawk stuff on the internet? I'm talking about hawking ideas, okay? And just selling you what sounds good to you. Now, it's packaged in all this other stuff that sounds progressive and enlightening and freedom and empiricism. Now, empiricism, let's take that one apart. Empiricism is a dogmatic philosophy which says that all that we know about the world is obtained through sense data. And essentially man is a blank slate, and that blank slate is just programmed through all of the externally received impressions and phenomena throughout our life. You don't have a soul. You don't have any sort of inherent qualities or abilities that make you who you are, which is completely retarded in relationship to the whole study of genetics and DNA and heritage and all that. So obviously you're not a complete blank slate. But no, Stefan's going to hawk to you the anthropology from 400 years ago. Okay, so as nobody's discovered anything in anthropology in the last 400 years, it's still all of this Enlightenment notion of universalized human nature, process of Darwinism and so forth. And Stefan, of course, is very enlightened with Darwinism and thinks that he believes in, I'm sure, DNA and this determining aspects of who you are and so forth. but that's not the point. The point is that his anthropology of the human mind is still that it's a blank slate, because he's talking about empiricism, and that is part and parcel of empiricism. Now, that does not mean that the empirical method of obtaining knowledge and facts is false. Obviously, any human being, I think, would admit that we learn things through our senses. Okay, so I'm not saying that there's no empirical data or knowledge. But what I'm saying is that empiricism, which is an Enlightenment ideology, completely different, says that the scientific method is somehow a means by which you can have a grand narrative explanation for everything in life. Now, if you doubt that, all you have to do is look at what these people do, whether it's Dawkins, Hitchens, Dennett, Molyneux, Kurt Doolittle, any of these people. They will attempt to give you a complete explanation of the totality of existence, history, so forth, from their constant parroting of the Darwinian mythos, the constant 4.5 billion years ago, the monkey brain Stefan's always talking about, just on and on and on. It just grinds it into you. I can't listen to these guys because that's all they do is just repeat these pseudo-intellectual mythologies and religious philosophies of Darwinism, which actually perfectly matches up to the Orphic myth and ancient Hindu philosophy, and promote this as, quote, science, when absolutely none of that is derived from empirical sense data. Okay, that's the utterly ridiculous part of this, is that none of that's derived from empirical sense data. These people all think that this is what the brute facts out there in the world tell them, that there are uninterpreted brute facts just sort of laying out there, and you only have to come look at them, inspect them from all sides, touch them, smell them, lick the facts and weigh them, and you will come to the obvious conclusion of the rationality of materialism and Darwinism. Now, how do we show then that the empiricist myth is false? Well, we take their founding presupposition, which is that all truths, right, all knowledge comes through sense data. And we take that statement and we say, does your foundational maxim or statement, Stefan, does it hold up to what it claims? In other words, can the statement, all human knowledge comes through sense data, be determined through sense data? Because it is, of course, a knowledge claim, is it not? Obviously it is. And if it's a knowledge claim, then we need to know if it meshes with the content of the claim. And it does not. It completely contradicts. There is no amount of sense data ever that can tell you that all sense data is obtained through scientific methodology. In other words, the statement itself is contradictory in a meta sense. All knowledge comes through sense data. Does that proposition come to you through sense data? No. Well, I go out there and I look under trees, right? Under rocks, in the forest, and I don't find that truth out there. Why? Because it's a propositional claim. It's a proposition that claims to make a universal statement. And you can never derive a universal truth from sense data. You just can't. Because by its very nature, we're limited in our abilities. Now, I'm sure Stefan would say, well, yeah, but that's the best we can do. No, it's not. It's not the best you can. It's a fucking awful way to go. It's one of the worst ways to go in philosophy. It's completely self-destructive. It doesn't get you much of anything other than a whole bunch, massive contradictions where you're stressed out and you don't know what the hell's going on. And you're going to get on the internet and promote materialism to millions of people. Okay? So it's not the best that we can do. And again, I don't know. There's just so many examples of these kinds of things where all we have to do is think about it like this. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a conceptual reality that's true, independent of phenomena in the world. And that's how we can see, right, that the laws of logic, right, that Stefan wants to utilize, they're not determined from the physical world and empirical investigation. Now, you might go to a book and read about Aristotle and logic, right? And you might learn the laws of logic, okay? But that is not the same thing as saying that the truthfulness of those things is equated to the material to the material on the page, right? So 2 plus 2 equals 4, whether it's written down on a page or not. And that's as true yesterday as it will be in 100 years, right? And so what we see from that is that there's some quality or aspect or some metaphysical reality that is not connected to change and flux in time. It's not dependent on that. But what these people do is reverse everything, flip it over to where the material world takes preeminence over any kind of other truth, and then they have to mash and cut up and force into the material world and their materialistic presuppositions and philosophy anything that doesn't match up to it. So 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, that's just a human social construct about observing patterns in the world. No, it's not, because a human social construct can be completely altered and changed based on the progression of human opinions. Okay, but human opinions tomorrow cannot make 2 plus 2 5. And that should be utterly obvious to people. Now, why is this not obvious? And there's all kinds of examples like this. The Mandelbrot set, right, which is a specific kind of artwork, oftentimes presented where you see this sort of infinite pattern that can be demonstrated only on computers. Okay, and then when we look at the Oxford mathematicians like Roger Penrose and others who talk about the Mandelbrot set, they note how this cannot be conceived in the human mind. It's impossible, because it's a kind of infinite spiraling progression that the mind just does not have the ability to encapsulate, right, in sort of an immediate image in the head, right? You can't perfectly think of a Mandelbrot set and the infinite progressions of the spirals. So how is there a Mandelbrot set, right? And I would direct you to Paul Davies' book, The Mind of God, on this, where he discusses many of these Platonic mathematicians, just, talking about this phenomenon, and how it's just one example amongst many of how mathematics and number theory prove the very thing I'm talking about. They prove empiricism false. For example, there's such thing as a kilogon. It's a 1,000-sided figure. No one has observed a 1,000-sided figure in all of its sides. Right? And so by empirical definition, there's no such thing as a kilogon. Yet we can have a computer that creates a kilogon, obviously with 1,000 sides. Now, from a human vantage point, it looks like a circle, but it's not a circle. It has 1,000 angles. A 1,000-sided figure. But this is not ever in your empirical experience. Not only that, the past is not in your empirical experience. You may have at one time experienced the past. You are not presently experiencing the past by direct sense data. And therefore we have no reason to believe in the past, according to these retards. Your own self is not the subject of empirical sense data. And therefore we have no reason to believe in the self, according to these retards. And therefore all of the arguments are immediately canceled out, because Stefan Molyneux doesn't exist. Stefan Molyneux has not empirically observed Stefan Molyneux. Now, he might have looked in the mirror, right, and seen that bald noggin, but that is not the same thing as the empirical experience of the self. But of course, Stefan would say, well, I'm identified with my brain. right? So the self is merely materialism, and we're back at the determinist fallacy again, right? The quote self is not a real thing anyway, because it's just a collection of impressions, according to David Hume, over time bundled together, and it's just a bunch of neurons. And so all those neurons are merely atoms and so forth. It's just molecules, cells, and therefore you're just a part of this ever fluctuating chaos, the Tiamat that's out there, and you're no real thing, and you're going to just dissolve back into the nothingness anyway. So this is all pointless. I don't even know why what's the point? It's all pointless, right? And if the totality of reality is pointless, then so are all of your arguments. Right? So this is the utter absurdity of all this. I just, God help us. But I can keep going here, right? I mean, if the self is not directly empirically experienced, and the past isn't, then neither is identity over time. Now, what is that? In philosophy, the notion of identity over time is the belief that objects possess some meaning, quality, or existence that makes it what it is over time. So even though I'm not physically the exact same as I was when I was 4 years old, I'm still a hunk of a dude years later, and I'm still the same me, right? Now, if I'm still the same me, if there's some self that's here in some way, then there's such a thing as identity of objects over time. The objects subsist with this identity over time. If I cut off my toenails, I'm still me, right? If I cut my fingers off and stick Cheetos in there, I'm still me. It's still the same me, regardless of the loss of some minuscule appendages or whatever. Now, that may sound bizarre or an odd question, but again, many people seem right until someone comes along to question. And that's actually a very important question in the history of philosophy, because it gets into this very idea of how can you make sense of identity over time when you believe that the world is just a never-ending process of evolutionary flux. Okay, so many more problems, can be teased out of this. For example, there's what's called mereology, or the study of objects in perception in philosophy. Okay, so when I look at an object, I'm always only seeing one side of an object, right? So I'm looking at my guitar right now. I can't see the back of that guitar. Now, I could get up and walk over there and pick the guitar up and turn it around and look at the back side of it. But when I'm looking at the back side of it, I'm not simultaneously looking at the front side of it, right? Now, that sounds like obvious. But wait a minute. Doesn't that then mean that at every point in time at which I'm looking at my guitar, there is always some hidden aspect to that guitar? Yeah, quite obviously. Right? I cannot have a God's eye view of guitar and see all sides and interconnections and screws and nuts and bolts and strings all at once. And so this is called the horizon of objects in this small branch of philosophy. And so since every object in the world has this horizon aspect to it, that is the threshold by which we cannot see past it, then that shows, again, that empiricism is completely stupid. Now, of course, Stefan and his crew would say, well, that may be, but we can't do any better, right? And so what you're going to get from this whole crew, and I've had probably 300 debates with this kind of person, including all my professors and so forth in university, you're going to get the response that, well, we're just pragmatic, okay? We're pragmatists. Screw all your philosophy, metaphysics. Get that out of here. We don't want that. I'm just pragmatic, man. This is the best we got. No. You don't get to jump into pragmatism when you start out with all of these claims of abstract logic, okay? So you don't get that out. You're not let off the hook that easy. You can't contradict yourself. I'm sorry, you don't get the right to contradict and on the one hand say that you believe in all this abstract logic functioning out there in the world to correspond to concept and object, metaphysically and then turn around and say, oh, but I don't believe in metaphysics because I'm a pragmatist and I just think empiricism is the best way to go. Right. No, I'm going to call you out for that obvious contradiction because it's absurd. It is. It's absurd to say, it's flat out contradicting yourself to say that you believe in abstract logic, that it applies to the world, and then when you're asked what reason and logic are, you turn around and say you're a pragmatist and you can't ask that question. Oh, screw you. You're full of shit. We're going to ask that question, and we're going to get called out for it because it's not true, and you're just promoting crap to everyone. So we're going to let Stefan speak some more about his philosophy.
Reason is thus incredibly valuable to us, but what if reason itself gets in the way of our survival and reproductive success? So, imagine, let me take you on a journey. Come with me, my friends. Imagine living on an isolated island where the only people around you are volcano-worshipping savages who rely on human sacrifice to appease their fiery god. Now, of course, the reality is this has more to do with they're trapped on this island, and what they're really managing is not the deity, but their anxiety about the periodic eruptions of the volcano. What would happen to you if you started questioning the rationale behind the practice? The lack of evidence about their rituals having any effect on the actual eruptions of the volcano, or the very idea of a deity. Assuming you survived this blasphemous behavior, would any woman in the tribe be willing to have sex with the man who angered the volcano god? This is just one of the many examples in which the ability to reason is an evolutionary negative for human beings. Now, what does happen, of course, in society is that you live on this volcano island. This is sort of political correctness. You live on this volcano island, you can't escape it. And once a volcano erupts while a man is dancing, so then you say, no dancing anymore. Another time a volcano erupts when a guy is singing. No dancing, no singing. Right? You just keep piling on these rules until, something changes, a society collapses, or a philosopher comes and props up the fights against the growing irrationality. So, as neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga points out, quote, what we must always keep in mind is that our brains have been sculpted by evolution to enable us to make better decisions that increase our reproductive success. Our brain's job description is to get its genes into the next generation.
So here we have the biological impetus is really the summation of existence. The furtherance of the species through procreation is really the driving impetus of everything. So this is called the biologicization of life and ethics and reality. And this is, of course, part and parcel to Darwinism. Man is merely one aspect, perhaps a little bit higher on the evolutionary totem pole than the monkey. Nevertheless, he is merely an animal being. Now, curiously, all of these great philosophers that I'm sure Stefan likes, like Aristotle would disagree that man is merely a biological entity, but that he also possesses a soul. But of course, Stefan does not believe in the soul because that's like all other conceptual realities or spiritual realities or superstitions. They don't have a real existence because they can't be seen or touched or felt. But of course, as we saw, the truth of 2 + 2 = 4 can't be seen, touched, or felt. I'm not talking about 2 rocks and then 2 more rocks on top of them. That's not the same thing as 2 + 2 = 4. That's an instance of 2 + 2 = 4, but it is not the same as 2 + 2 = 4. Now, how would I know that? Well, if I wipe those rocks away, if I melt those rocks down to no longer having the rock form they had, does anyone think that 2 + 2 no longer equals 4? No. We all know that that is an abiding, invariant, immaterial truth on its face a priori. And that shows that there are realities and truths and existences beyond merely what can be seen, touched, and felt, as well as all of the myriad examples that I gave before of the past, the existence of the self over time, right? The existence of consciousness which is presupposed when you talk and make arguments, right? The ability to transfer the thought process that you have and the truth that you expound through your vocal cords to another person's mind, which is all a bunch of chemicals bouncing around, and that they receive that truth. So language itself presupposes the immaterial reality of conceptual truths. Otherwise, there's no communication. You can't communicate, right? So here you are communicating, talking to people, utilizing linguistic principles that are metaphysical, communicating truths which are not merely physical to other persons who understand them. And the presupposition is that they are actually conceiving of the same concept as you, which by definition isn't possible if it's just atoms in the brain, because their atoms are different from yours, right? And here you are using all this stuff, which makes absolutely no sense on your worldview. Absolutely no sense on your foundational presuppositions. Utter nonsense, right? So you have to start at this kind of groundwork. You have to start here with these kind of people just to dismantle these presuppositions, because they're no good. They don't work. They're nonsensical. They always collapse into some kind of absurdity, which is what all materialism is monism. Okay, we'll make it simple, right? Materialism ends in monism, everything being the same, and thus your experience illusory. So all of this junk is going to land you right back in some digression of Far Eastern thought and Maya, where everything is illusory. So the irony here of this great progress past religious superstition, where he characterizes everybody who believes in something religious as a bunch of savages on a volcano island. The irony, of course, is that the philosophy of materialism and monism takes you right back to the volcano island, where Stefan Molyneux's cult of reason will probably lop your head off like Robespierre and like the French revolutionary atheists and materialists. Okay, so the absurdity and hypocrisy here of the atheist materialists who always tout this nonsense of religion being the source of every man's evils and ills. In the 20th century, we've seen that the atheistic materialists are the very ones who are the most vicious in their collectivism and lopping off the heads of everybody else who disagrees with them. Now, how might this be? Well, that would never happen, because Molyneux is a libertarian and he believes in freedom of thought. Well, Molyneux's gathered quite an audience, hasn't he? Right. And what happens to people who gather big audiences, especially in these kinds of views, is that they take on a cult of personality. And that cult of personality, when it's directed to that person and not to something like a religion or a god, is that person takes on the godlike characteristics and it becomes a new cult. And when you disagree with that, then you should have your head lopped off. Right. Now, maybe in internet land, we're not going to get our literal heads lopped off. But you will deserve to be shunned by the new cult, the cult of reason. And again, do these people not think that the cult of reason, that it's never been enacted? I mean, how many times has it been enacted in history? You're living in a nation founded on the cult of reason out of the Enlightenment, America. France was a cult of reason. All the communist states were cults of reason. So every time this has been enacted, it's a complete disaster and failure. And then these people just want to hawk all the same stuff from the last 300-400 years. And this is what they think is the penultimate, highest place for philosophy and wisdom, is just the garbage from the last 300 years, which is obviously put the world into a worse state than it was 500 years ago, I would argue. Right? I mean, nobody has seen the world wars that we've seen, right? When you have the London, New York banking industrial complex, which is completely in love with materialism and atomism and empiricism. They're the ones who promoted it through the Royal Society for the last 300 years, 400 years. Read Robert Lomas's book, Freemasonry and the Birth of Modern Science, and you'll learn about the Royal Society and their love of materialism. Look at Bentham, look at John Locke. Look at all of those figures and their empiricism and what they promoted, and you get panopticism. So banker materialism, 1776, 1789 equals your tyranny, your head lopped off, and globo corporate banker computer flash trade state, world state. So there you go. Well, the irony. Stefan is going to tell us about the collapse of Western civilization, which has collapsed precisely because of the philosophy that he holds, which is an inorganic, alien philosophy that comes out of Renaissance occultism and Hermeticism and alchemy, which I'm sure he thinks is laughable and ludicrous. Yet all you need to do is go read Cornelius Agrippa and the Medicis and the Hermeticists and alchemists who were instrumental in the Royal Society, Paolo Sarpi, Newton, and so forth, who were alchemists as they were esoteric weirdo materialists of a kind. So all of these great heroes, right? Sorry, Stefan, but that's a big fail there. We're going to let you talk some more.
So, we need a reasoning ability to create everything from spheres to computers, yet in the social realm, logic and empiricism can be extremely dangerous. This dichotomy is at the origin of a fundamental split within the human mind, a split that philosophers and all who deal with reason really, really, really need to understand. Surely you might say, well, things have changed since the more savage days of primitive tribalism. Nowadays, if you live in the West, questioning the beliefs of, say, a religious person is far more likely to invite requests for logical justification than lashes of a whip, a barrage of heavy stones, or death at the stake. Believers may even set up a public debate if you're famous enough. Does this mean they value reason? According to the latest research and the painful experience of many philosophers, that's not very likely.
Oh. So we do not live in a progressive civilization even after hundreds of years of the cult of the goddess of reason, and this is the fault of stupid, unevolved humans and religion. And what Stefan's going to do is cite us a whole bunch of peer-reviewed papers. Peer-reviewed papers. Peer-reviewed. Well, I'm going to play you the clip that I love so much from our friend Chris Kendall over at Hoaxbusters, who in a great improvisational, impromptu flowering forth spewed out an excellent refutation of this very notion on his podcast, The Hoaxbusters, that I think is perfectly applicable to Stefan and his cult here.
Peer-reviewed science, even though peer-reviewed papers you can pull up, and I've gone through that multiple times, where it's like, oh, peer review says there is no scientific method being conducted on the peer review process itself, and that's the problem. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, they admit that in peer reviewed papers. So it's a peer review paper about peer review papers where they're saying peer review is basically faith-based, and we don't apply the scientific method to the peer review process itself. So they don't apply a scientific method to the scientific method. In other words, what ends up in part of established dogma, people's perception is, oh, this is peer reviewed. So, it's got to be true because it wouldn't be able to stand because there's all these people checking it out. You know, anybody in the world could check it out, and they could duplicate the experiments. I'll hear this time and time again. So you could do the experiments, you could check it out yourself, and like, if you were to find it wrong, you could tell them, and they would have to change it. It's like, are you insane? Are you totally insane? But okay, that's what you believe. Okay, you believe that that's peer review, and that's how it works. Do you have any evidence for that, sir? Any evidence? Anything? Other than your belief, then that's how peer review works. Because I got peer review papers that say that ain't the way it works. You got anything but your belief? No, you just have the belief. You believe that. You don't know that. You don't have any evidence for that. So when you talk to me about your bullcrap about evolution theory is true and the majority of science believes, that doesn't even mean anything. It's like the editor of the Lancet said half of all peer review papers is false. So which half are you referring to? You got a peer review, you got a bunch of peer review papers, and you want to quote them and prove to me evolution theory? It's like, okay, did you vet these? How did you vet those? How do you know which ones are properly peer reviewed and what you don't know nothing about it? You don't know anything. That's what just drives me nuts. It's like, okay, there's no evidentiary basis for your belief system, but you believe that that's how peer review works, and you believe you really got you something if you got a peer-reviewed paper. And am I saying that all peer-reviewed studies are false? No, I don't believe that. It's like, okay, so you create a false dichotomy where it's like, oh, you reject science, so you shouldn't be talking on a microphone, you shouldn't be using a computer, you shouldn't be using a elastic waistband pants, because science gave you all those things, and now you bite the hand that feeds you and deny science, and you're a hypocrite. It's like, man, that's the most idiotic non-argument ever. And then you can make the argument that, I could point to a lot of things that Scientology does that's good. And they have buffets, and they put on for the elderly, and they feed people, and they fight the evils of Big Pharma. And Scientology, man, I mean, they have decent prices at their gift shop. They don't rip people off. I heard L. Ron Hubbard was a pretty nice guy most of the time, except when you crossed him. He did dress like a captain of a ship and sail ships around, and that's pretty cool. Yeah, believe in Scientology, because everything Scientology puts out is right. It's like, what are you, nuts? So you could point to some benefits of a certain given organization. Let's say Scientology or Mormonism or whatever. Oh, charitable works and this and that. So yeah, good beneficial things come out of Freemasonry or whatever. Mormonism, whatever. You could point out good, beneficial, do-gooder stuff. John Gotti passed out Christmas turkeys. I bring that up. Oh, on Thanksgiving, every year, good man, good turkey, good. And is the mafia good? I mean, is the mafia... No, a better question would be, so is everything the mafia stand for and everything is validated by, you can point to benefits of it, you know? So like, it's the same thing with Western established naturalistic, materialistic, centered philosophy of science being integrated into, you know, sciences, anything that involves science or the scientific method, you know, scientific engineering, sciences, or anything like that. And so it's like, it's an all or nothing proposition. Either you take it all or you take none. It's like, are you freaking insane? Where do you get these ideas, people? Is that the way you apply that logic to everything? Because you're in trouble, dude. So you can go and look at the Mormons' blog where they got all this science laid out that establishes Mormonism. So, okay, here's a scientific body that's made up of Mormon making a scientific claim. So is their scientific claim valid until you can come along and falsify it and disprove it? It's like, no. Neither is the claims of establishment Western science as an organization, as a culture, as a group, as a religious body, because they certainly are a religious body in many respects. And they're a political organization in many respects. And every characteristic you can point to a cult or a religious group is present within modern established science. And why do I harp on that all the time? It's because that's where all these belief systems come from. Same with the nuke bomb. It's like, that's where all that comes from. It's belief in science. And science is in quotes because when people say that, they're not even talking about the scientific method. And if you doubt me, look at the way the word is used in a sentence. It's not used... I was trying to explain that before. It's like, oh, you know, what did I use an example? I maybe come up with a better one, but for now, I just come up with examples like, oh, operating a motor vehicle is true.
Yes, exactly. Great points from Chris Kindle there, and I would completely agree. So I wanted to add, as I pointed out before, so when we look at mathematicians who are also scientists and work on pretty advanced, heavy scientific projects, especially someone like Roger Penrose, right, or mathematicians involved in computing, engineering science that utilizes a lot of mathematics. Okay, now this is a branch of science to all you science worshippers or scientism adherents to the religion of scientism. We note that in Paul Davies' book, he discusses the Platonic aspects of the mathematician. Now, I'm not advocating all the Platonism of these people. The point is to point out how this illustrates what I'm saying about conceptual realities beyond the material realm and how real it is, and that mathematics shows this, obviously, and a priori. Davies says, mathematical objects take on a life of their own and often display totally unexpected properties. On the other hand, the idea of a transcendent realm of mathematical ideas seems very mystical. Yes, it does, doesn't it, to the materialist dogmatists of our day. Nevertheless, some distinguished mathematicians are self-confessed Platonists. One of these was Kurt Gödel. As might be expected, Gödel based many of his philosophy of mathematics on the work of undecidability. He reasoned that there was always to be mathematical statements that are true, but can never be proved to be so from existing axioms. This is presuppositional transcendental arguments. He envisaged these true statements as therefore already existing in a Platonic realm or domain or spiritual out there somewhere beyond our ken. Another truth is something that goes beyond, or this is another Platonist is Oxford mathematician Roger Penrose. Quote, mathematical truth is something that goes beyond mere formalism. There often appears to be some profound reality about these mathematical concepts that goes beyond the deliberations of any particular mathematician. It is as though human thought is, instead, guided towards an external, eternal truth. A truth which has a reality of its own, independent of the human mind and social constructs. That's my added emphasis there at that last point. I added that point. It is a truth which is a reality of its own and is revealed only partially to some of us. Taking as an example the system of complex numbers, Penrose says that it has a profound, timeless reality. Another example inspired by Penrose is to adopt the Platonism evident in the Mandelbrot set, after IBM computer scientist Benoit Mandelbrot. The set is actually a geometrical form known as a fractal, which cannot be pictured in the human mind. Penrose remarks that when Mandelbrot embarked on the study of the set, he had no prior conception of the fantastic elaboration inherent in it. How are mathematical entities social constructs then? Penrose writes, the complete detail and complication of the structure of Mandelbrot's set cannot be comprehended by any single human being, nor can it be fully revealed in any single computer. It would seem that the structure is thus not part of our mind. It has a reality of its own. The computer is being used in essentially the same way that an experimental physicist uses a piece of experimental apparatus to explore a structure of the physical world. The Mandelbrot set is not an invention of the human mind. It was a discovery. There you go. Now, where is it? Oops. Uh-oh. It's not out there in the world. Uh-oh. Oops. It's not an invention of the human mind. It was discovered. It's not in the material world. Uh-oh. What do we do, materialists? What do we do? Quick, squeeze it into your worldview. Quick, invent something. Quick. Mathematician and well-known popularizer Martin Gardner concludes, quote, Penrose finds it incomprehensible, as do I, that anyone could suppose that such an exotic structure is not out there existing truly as much as Mount Everest is. It is subject to exploration in much the same way as a jungle. Is mathematics invented or discovered? Asks Penrose. Or are any mathematicians really uncovering truths that aren't already there? Right? Do we think that the truthfulness of the Mandelbrot set wasn't true until the IBM computer was invented? I mean, come on. No, because the mathematical principles are all there, right? Before it was discovered. Now, I just posted an article from Wired magazine that deals with this very issue in relationship to higher dimensional mathematics. Now, we can't see these higher dimensions, so I guess they don't exist, but we can do all these mathematical problems that relate to them. And this is the Wired magazine article that is titled "Mathematician Solves the Century-Old Sphere Problem in Higher Dimensions." How are we doing these mathematics? And higher dimensional mathematics do factor into computers, by the way. Mandelbrot set is yet another example of that. But they're not material. In proclaiming his adherence to the latter viewpoint, Penrose points out that in such cases, the Mandelbrot set, much more comes out of the structure that is put into them in the first place. One may take the view that in such cases, mathematicians have actually stumbled upon the works of God. It is a feeling not uncommon amongst artists that in their greatest works they are revealing eternal truths which have some kind of prior ethereal existence, and I cannot help but feel that with mathematics, the case for believing in some kind of ethereal eternal existence is a great deal stronger. A mindscape. Rudy Rucker thinks of mathematical objects as occupying a sort of mental space. Psychosphere, which he calls a mindscape, just as physical objects occupy a physical space. A person who does mathematical research is an explorer of the mindscape in much the same way that Armstrong, Livingston, or Cousteau explore the physical aspects of the universe. Occasionally, different explorers pass over the same terrain and report independently on their findings. Just as we all share the same universe, we all share the same mindscape, says Rucker. Penrose conjectures that the way mathematicians make discoveries and communicate mathematical truths to each other evidences a Platonic realm, which is the argument I just made about Stefan and language. I imagine that whenever the mind perceives a mathematical idea, that it makes contact with Plato's world of mathematical forms or concepts. When one sees, quote unquote, a mathematical truth, one's consciousness breaks through into this world of ideas and it makes direct contact with it. When mathematicians communicate, this is made possible by each other having a direct route to this truth, and the consciousness of each being in a position to perceive mathematical truths directly through this process of, quote, seeing. The mental image that each one has when making contact with this Platonic realm might be rather different in each case, but the communication of the truth is possible because each is in direct contact with the same externally existing Platonic world. There you go. I mean, how much clearer could it be? And so, therefore, please break free from this materialistic box and construct that is related to reason's deification. And by the way, we don't even know what reason is. We've never been told that. It's just assumed that there's somehow this functioning power of reason out there or in our minds somewhere that isn't part of the materialistic process, even though everything in our being is, according to Stefan and company. But that, I think, is going to do us for the first chunk, for the free persons out there. And then, of course, the second chunk, we will get into more of the esoteric side of this with Hoffman and a little bit more on evolutionary theory in relationship to these so-called philosophers. And then we're going to talk about Titus Brookhard's essay on ancient cosmology and Darwinism, and then we're going to talk about Cosmos and Transcendence and Michael Hoffman's Secret Society of Psychological Warfare. So you've been listening to Jay's Analysis Podcast as we deconstruct the erroneous philosophy, so-called the sophistry of materialistic atheism, and using as our test case Stefan Molyneux. So if you like what you hear, please check out my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, available at Trine Day Publishers, as well as subscribing to my philosophy lectures and podcasts at jaysanalysis.com for $4.95 a month. Thank you for listening.